A few years ago, I decided to go camping alone in the secluded woods of Washington. I had heard whispers of an abandoned cabin deep in the forest, a place where people claimed strange things happened. People said it was haunted, but I never really put stock into rumors. I was an experienced camper, and I was looking for some peace away from the chaos of the city. It was late afternoon when I reached the area where the cabin was supposed to be, according to the map I had found online. The forest was thick with trees, and the sound of the wildlife made me feel like I was in the middle of nowhere. I figured I'd just follow the old trail that led deeper into the woods and find this cabin for myself. After hours of walking, the sun began to set. The shadows in the woods grew longer, and an eerie quiet surrounded me. That's when I saw it. Through the trees, hidden just beyond a small clearing, stood the cabin. It was old, covered in moss, and the windows were boarded up. A faint smell of damp wood and decay filled the air. I approached cautiously. Something about this place felt off, but my curiosity got the better of me. I pushed open the creaky door, which surprisingly didn't make much noise. Inside, the cabin was mostly empty, except for some broken furniture and piles of dust. There was an old fireplace in the center, the kind of place people once gathered around. But what really caught my attention was a strange, unsettling painting on the wall. It was a faded portrait of a man with hollow eyes. The expression on his face was unnerving, as though he was watching me. I decided to set up my camp there for the night. As I settled in, the atmosphere in the cabin grew colder. It was strange because the temperature outside was warm, but inside, it felt like an invisible chill was creeping through the wooden walls. I lit a fire in the fireplace, hoping to bring some warmth, but the unease in the cabin didn't leave me. The night grew darker, and with it, the silence seemed to stretch on for hours. Just as I was about to drift to sleep, I heard it, a low thud, followed by a faint scraping noise. It came from upstairs. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, trying to convince myself it was just the house settling. But the sound grew louder, like footsteps, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way upstairs. The creaking of the floorboards under my feet made my heart race. When I reached the top, I saw the door to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, and the light from my flashlight flickered as I approached. The door slowly creaked open, revealing an empty room with an old, dust-covered bed in the corner. But then I noticed something strange. There was a chair in the middle of the room, facing the window, and sitting in the chair, facing me, was the same man from the painting. I gasped, stumbling backward. The figure sat perfectly still, its face just visible in the dim light. Its hollow eyes stared at me, unblinking. I turned to run, but before I could even reach the stairs, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. I struggled to get the door open, but it was stuck. I could hear the scraping sound again, coming closer and closer. I finally managed to wrench the door open and bolted down the stairs, grabbing my backpack on the way out. As I ran out of the cabin and into the woods, I could hear the sound of footsteps following me, matching my pace. I didn't look back until I reached the clearing, gasping for breath. When I turned, the cabin was gone, completely vanished. The trees and the ground where it once stood were untouched. I don't know what happened that night, but I've never gone back to that place, and I'll never forget the feeling of those hollow eyes watching me from the darkness. The cabin and forgotten soul. It was winter in the mountains of Colorado when I decided to take a solo trip into the wilderness for some peace and quiet. I wasn't afraid of being alone, and I enjoyed the solitude. I had been to mountains a few times before, but this time I was heading to an isolated cabin that a friend had recommended. They said it was remote, but comfortable, a perfect place for a few days of reflection. When I arrived, the cabin was exactly as described, small, rustic, and set far away from civilization. No electricity, no running water. But everything I needed to be off the grid for a few days. The first night was quiet. I made myself dinner, read a book, and fell asleep by the fire. But things started to change on the second night. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound coming from upstairs. Footsteps. At first, I thought I was imagining things. After all, the cabin was completely empty and I was alone. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but the footsteps persisted. I got up and checked the upstairs, but the cabin was empty. No one was there. I shook it off, telling myself it was just the wind or the building settling. The next day, I went for a hike, trying to clear my mind. When I came back in the late afternoon, the door to the cabin was wide open. I was sure I had locked it before I left, but maybe I was mistaken. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling as I stepped inside. Everything appeared to be in place, except for one thing. A single chair had been moved from the kitchen to the living room. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me nervous. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard again the footsteps. But this time, it wasn't just a light shuffle. It was as if someone was pacing back and forth upstairs. I had no choice but to go up and check. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing in the corner of the room, facing the wall. The air was thick with the smell of something old, something rotting. I called out, "Hello?" But the figure didn't respond. Slowly, it turned around, revealing a pale, gaunt face with hollow eyes. I couldn't move, frozen in terror as the figure began to shuffle toward me. I ran downstairs and out of the cabin without even looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, where I called for help. When I returned with the authorities the next morning, the cabin was empty. No one was there, but they found something strange. A journal that wasn't mine, written in a hand that seemed almost frantic, describing the haunting of the very cabin I had stayed in. The last entry in the journal was chilling. "It's coming for me tonight. It won't stop until I'm gone. I haven't been back to that cabin, and I never will." The Cabin in the Snow, a true horror story. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway. Just me and a couple of friends, isolated in a small cabin in the middle of the snow-covered mountains of Utah. We were all looking forward to a peaceful break, away from the chaos of everyday life. The cabin was a modest, two-story structure that looked like it had been abandoned for years, but still seemed intact. There were no neighbors for miles, just trees and snow. We arrived in the late afternoon, and as the sun set, the temperature dropped rapidly. The wind howled outside, but inside, we started the fire and unpacked our things. We were all in high spirits, laughing and talking as we settled in for the night. Around midnight, something strange happened. I woke up to the sound of something moving downstairs. I wasn't sure if it was one of my friends, but the house was silent now, no laughter or voices. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe someone was just getting a drink or something, but the sound continued. It was faint at first, but became louder, like footsteps on the creaky wooden floor. My heart began to race. I got up and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. I called out softly, "Hey, is everything all right?" But there was no answer. I felt a chill down my spine as the footsteps grew closer, as though someone was moving toward the base of the stairs. I quickly turned back around and head back to my room, but that's when I heard the most unsettling noise, a low growl, almost like an animal. I froze in my tracks. What in the world was that? I could hear it breathing heavily from downstairs. My curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs. When I reached the bottom, I found the living room empty, but the door to the basement was wide open. The growling sound was louder now, and I could see a faint shadow moving from the basement door. I slowly approached it, every fiber of my being telling me to turn back. But I didn't. I was determined to find out what was happening. As I reached the basement door, I shone my flashlight down, and that's when I saw it. There was a figure standing at the bottom of the stairs, but it wasn't human. It was tall, its skin pale and almost translucent, with limbs that were too long for its body. Its face was distorted, eyes wide and black, with no sign of emotion or expression. The growl grew louder as it slowly moved up the stairs toward me. I backed away in terror, but I couldn't move fast enough. The figure took one slow step after another, each one bringing it closer to me. I finally turned and ran up the stairs, but when I looked back, the creature was right behind me. It seemed to glide rather than walk, and it was too fast to outrun. I slammed the door to the room and locked it, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I could hear it breathing outside the door, waiting just as still as before. I don't know how long I lay there, terrified to even blink. The creature never came back, and by the time morning arrived, it was gone. The rest of my friends woke up to my frantic whispers and nervous breakdown. They didn't believe me, thinking it was just a nightmare, but I knew what I saw. I've never been back to that cabin, and I never will. Some things should stay in the darkness, in places where they belong, and some experiences should never be relived. The Cabin by the Lake, a true horror story. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway. Just me and my two friends, escaping the busy city life, to spend a few days at a cabin by the lake in the middle of nowhere. The drive was long, and by the time we arrived, the sun was just setting. The cabin was old, with creaky wooden floors and a musty smell in the air, but it had a certain charm to it. The lake was beautiful, surrounded by dense woods that stretched for miles. The perfect setting for a peaceful retreat. We settled in, unpacked our things, and made a fire in the fireplace. As night fell, we gathered around, telling stories, laughing, and enjoying the tranquility. But as the evening wore on, things started to feel off. Around 10 p.m., we heard strange noises coming from the woods. It was a distant sound, like something heavy crashing through the trees. At first, we assumed it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a bear. But the sounds grew louder, and they seemed to be getting closer. We decided to go outside and check, but the night was so dark we could barely see anything. Still, we stood there, listening to the eerie noises coming from the trees. Suddenly, everything went silent. Too silent. We went back inside, a bit on edge, but tried to brush it off. We had a couple of drinks and went to bed, hoping the noises were just our imagination. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of someone whispering my name. At first, I thought it was one of my friends playing a prank on me, but when I looked around, they were both sound asleep in their beds. The whispering grew louder, almost as if it was coming from the other side of the room. My heart started racing as I listened closely. The voice was clear now, and it was saying my name over and over. I sat up in bed, trying to calm myself down, but I could feel something was wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly stepped out of bed. The room felt colder than it should have been, and I could see my breath in the air. I shone the flashlight around, but there was nothing there. No one. I went to check on my friends, and they were still sleeping. But as I turned to leave the room, I noticed something strange. The door to the basement was slightly ajar. I was sure it had been closed earlier. My curiosity got the better of me, and I went down the creaky stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The basement was cold and damp, with old furniture covered in dust. There was nothing unusual, except for an old wooden chest in the corner. I approached it, hesitating for a moment. Something about it felt wrong. As I opened the chest, I was hit with a wave of cold air, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the bottom of the chest was a collection of photographs. They were old, yellow with age, but what caught my attention were the people in the photos. They were all taken in the same cabin, but the faces of the people were distorted. They looked like they were in pain, their eyes wide with terror. As I looked closer, I saw something else. A photo of me, taken from outside the cabin, standing by the lake. I froze, unable to move. How could someone have taken this photo? I had only just arrived. The room suddenly felt much colder, and I could feel something watching me. I slammed the chest shut and ran back upstairs. But when I reached the top, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There, standing at the foot of the stairs, was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched wide in a grotesque grin. It didn't move, but I could feel its presence, like it was waiting for me to make the next move. I turned and ran out of the cabin, not looking back. My friends woke up to my frantic yelling, and we quickly packed up and left the cabin behind. We didn't speak much during the drive home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following us, watching us in the shadows. We never went back to that cabin, and we never spoke of it again. But to this day, I can't forget the photos, the figure, or the cold, dark presence that seemed to follow us out of woods.